Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on building resilience in the face of growing supply chain turmoil. My name is Mirko Woitzik. I'm directing the risk insight and analysis operations at Everstream Analytics. We are a supply chain risk management company that helps businesses create more resilient supply chains. I will spend the next 20 minutes mainly talking about three things: what the current risk landscape for supply chains looks like in 2022, what companies are doing to prepare for the next crisis, and last but not least, what that means for the challenge of decarbonizing supply chains and the path to net zero. But first, let me start out by giving a quick overview on why supply chain resilience is so important. Almost every company is affected by it. According to Gartner, 97% of supply chains have had at least one disruptive event in the last 2 years. Second, disruptions are costly. They cost organizations around the world an average of $184 million per year. And third, supply chains are also increasingly seen as critical to a company's bottom line. They can be responsible for major financial hits, and today are much more often mentioned in earnings calls than before the COVID-19 pandemic. So where do supply chains stand in 2022? It's hard to remember, but there was a general sense of optimism in January of 2022 that this would finally be the year where COVID-19 would be left behind us and supply chain congestion and other turmoil would start to subside. But what happened in the last 11 months is obviously no secret, but I just want to highlight the biggest disruptions that have prevented supply chains from normalizing much further this year. In February, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has put geopolitical risks right on top of every supply chain leader's agenda again. And the war is obviously still ongoing. We still see major impacts on energy supply throughout Europe, for example, that has rippled through many manufacturing supply chains over the past month. But geopolitical risks have also put everyone on high alert in August, when political tensions between the US and China escalated over a delegation visit to Taiwan. Across the strait in China, COVID-19 lockdowns are ongoing and have been actually worsening this year, with major supply chain hubs such as Shanghai, Chengdu, and Shenzhen being affected. To this day, China is the only major country where lockdowns still exist on a frequent basis. And while in China, workers have recently revolted against the lockdowns, especially in Zhengzhou, at the largest iPhone assembly plant worldwide, elsewhere around the world, workers at ports, airports, or railways have launched an unprecedented number of strike actions in 2022 against low wage increases amid high inflation. And last but not least, extreme weather continues to play its part in preventing supply chains from returning to a somewhat more normal state, whether the extreme heat waves across Asia, Europe, and North America this summer, or on the other end of extremes, the extreme downpours and flooding that has occurred in Pakistan or Australia. So what has this meant for supply chains in 2022? First, it meant the continuation and expansion of material, component, and commodity shortages that started during the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen agricultural commodity prices hit record highs following a series of export restrictions that have been imposed following the outbreak of war in Ukraine, including on palm oil, wheat, and sugar in major exporting countries. And then since the summer, we've seen the heat waves and drought that have further exacerbated the situation. Also, metal commodities have been in short supply in the past 9 months and have also reached record high prices since the invasion of Ukraine, including for nickel, copper, and aluminium. And then there's the energy crisis in Europe, which has been sparked by a disrupted natural gas supply from Russia, and which has caused multiple energy-intensive industries to curtail or entirely shut production, causing in turn material shortages from petrochemicals to plastics to zinc and fertilizers. And second, it also meant that disruptions on a supplier level have hit supply chains in 2022. Besides the energy crisis in Europe that I just mentioned, in particular the continuous lockdowns of major cities in China have rippled through supplier bases from Shanghai Kunshan, a major base for Taiwanese electronics companies, to China's southern technology hub in Shenzhen, and to Chengdu, which is an automotive hub in central China. Most recently, Foxconn's iPhone assembly plant in Zhengzhou has underlined how even the most sophisticated supply chains, such as Apple's, are not immune against zero COVID-19 policy, and as a result, will have to deal with costly major delays in new iPhone shipments. And third, supply chains in 2022 have also faced shipping disruptions, although not to the extent that we've seen in 2020 and 2021, where congestion was the major issue. This time it's been port strikes in the US, in Germany, in the UK. It's been rail strikes in North America, and it's been political tensions over Taiwan that briefly disrupted shipping in the Taiwan Strait, for instance. And on top of that, there was the extreme weather, such as Major Hurricane Ian, that hit Florida in early October. Shipping prices have come down in recent months, though, which has largely been attributed to demand drop and a looming recession, but still shipping disruptions continue to be an issue for supply chains in 2022. I want to turn the attention now to what companies can actually do against this extent of supply chain turmoil. How are they mitigating some of these risks, especially those with very global supply chains? The first step is always to visualize the entire supply chain network, from tier 1 suppliers to factories and any logistic node in your network. Then on top of that, it's important to have a risk monitoring capability that tells you when something is being disrupted, when something goes wrong, whether that's at a port, an airport, or at your supplier. That allows you then, in the third step, to take an informed action and activate sort of contingency plans, whether that's sort of checking buffer stock or organizing alternative supply or switching to alternative modes of transportation to mitigate the potential risk. But in order to get ahead of the next crisis and do more proactive and strategic risk management, supply chain leaders have been turning more and more towards identifying their sub-tier supply chain to better understand where the next big risk could be coming from. Especially the situation in Ukraine has revealed that most companies struggle to know how their supply chains were connected to Ukraine. Most actually knew whether they had tier 1 suppliers in Ukraine, but very few had visibility whether their tier 1s were sourcing materials or components from sub-tier suppliers based in Ukraine. Think of sunflower oil for consumer goods and food and beverage customers, or neon gases for the semiconductor industry, or even cables and wire harnesses for the industrial machinery or automotive industries. And this actually confirms the quite telling numbers from a recent McKinsey study on supply chain visibility that underlines how complex the task of gaining visibility into your sub-tier supply chain is for companies. The study showed that more than 50% of all supply chain disruptions occurred at the tier 2 level or below, but only about 25% of respondents said that their organization had good visibility into everything that's beyond tier 1. So what can we learn from this? Because most of the disruption actually occur at lower tier levels, it goes to show that just having visibility into your tier 1s is not enough anymore. By not having that visibility, companies are exposed to greater financial, operational, and reputational risks that will be difficult to control once they start to ripple through supply chains. So against this backdrop, what can companies really do to improve the visibility into their multi-tier supply chain? First, they should ask the right questions, starting by who are your suppliers? What materials and how much supply do they provide? Where are they located? How many alternative suppliers are there? Are they all located within the same geographic area, such as the two neon producing companies in Ukraine that still in February of this year accounted for about 50% of global neon supply to the semiconductor industry? And second, companies can use graph technology that identifies key relationships between companies and their suppliers, as well as the flow of materials between them. And they do that by analyzing millions of corporate relationships and billions of transaction transaction data across individual business networks. The result is an AI-driven visualization of your sub-tier supply chain beyond the tier 1 level that is simply not feasible or achievable with a survey-based approach only, in particular for thousands of suppliers. And once you have that multi-tier visibility, you can start monitoring your sub-tier suppliers and get a head start into disruptions that would eventually have an impact on your operations, revenue, or delivery capacity weeks, potentially months down the line. So companies are looking to widen their view of the supply chain amid the ongoing turmoil to gain deeper insights into where the potential next big disruption may end up happening. Now let's turn our attention to how this state of crisis that supply chains have been in for the last 2.5 years has impacted the long-term objectives of decarbonizing supply chains. On the negative side, the ongoing supply chain disruptions have caused serious setbacks for decarbonization goals. First, it's likely that electric truck manufacturing will not be able to sustain a similar momentum to electric cars, with many promising startups reducing their production targets, laying off people, or restructuring in recent months. Second, one of the issues the emerging industry has been facing is the shift in prioritization for zero-emission logistics that has occurred in the past 2.5 years because companies have simply been fighting for their own survival. And third, amid signs of a potential economic recession, major regulators such as the EU have recently adopted potentially less ambitious positions on pushing the development of electric recharging infrastructure along major transportation routes in Europe in the next 5 years. And knowing how critical this infrastructure is for road operators to make the switch to alternative fuel technology, this doesn't bode well. However, on the positive side, the end of combustion engine sales that was agreed upon in the EU from 2035 will probably provide more momentum to supporting electric truck manufacturing and infrastructure development as well to further reduce emissions and achieve net zero by 2050. On top of that, the COVID-19 pandemic and other subsequent crisis events have undoubtedly pushed companies to fundamentally rethink their supply chain networks because the calculus for efficiency versus reliability has entirely shifted in favor of the latter. As companies will very likely diversify their supplier and manufacturing bases out of China, we will see more regional supply chains with hubs across all continents that could emerge that make supply chains much shorter than what they are today. And also, supply chains are likely to see a significant impact from decarbonization goals in the shipping industry over the next couple of years, which will again change the cost calculus for ocean shipping and by extension where goods are being sourced. Lower volume trade lanes will very likely get less frequent and higher cost services, making it more attractive to source nearer to where goods are being produced and produce goods nearer to where they're being consumed. And with these remarks, I'd like to conclude the presentation. Thank you everyone for listening, and I look forward to an interesting panel discussion.